Good evening, America. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the latest edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you as always from the nation's capital and the WiredToFishCoffee.com studios. You know this Wired to Fish Coffee is my favorite coffee, the official coffee now of Just the News, and you can go right to Wired, the #2fishcoffee.com, and get a fantastic 10% discount on all the great blends, as well as the Just the News mug. You can even get a copy of my book autograph. Go check it out there. 10% off when you use the promo code JustNews at WiredToFishCoffee.com. All right, we're going to forego the normal headlines tonight. Amanda, I know just real quickly, President Trump was at Fort Bragg, got a hero's welcome there. There were some guys jumping out of planes. It looked great. Very powerful speech. And now he's on his way back.
Indeed, yes. This is to kick off the 250th birthday for the Army, and that's going to be a parade happening this Saturday. Oh my goodness, it is going to be. I wasn't even planning on going. I signed up for the media credentials, but I just don't think I'm going to be able to miss it, considering what happened today at Fort Bragg and all of the fanfare surrounding. And honestly, 250 years for our Army, that's pretty special.
It is pretty special.
And President Trump definitely commemorated it well today at Fort Bragg.
And all those extraordinary soldiers in the background as he was giving that speech. We honor all of them for their great service to the country. All right, we've been tracking two stories. One that broke here on Just the News overnight with our great chief investigative correspondent, Jerry Dunley. The other being released just a few minutes ago by Chuck Grassley. And when you put them together, you realize how insane some of the things that were going on in the Biden years. Okay, last night, Jerry Dunleavy broke the story that Joe Biden was juicing the domestic terrorism numbers by a large factor by counting every individual J6 defendant as an individual domestic terrorism case. You're seeing the headline up there. Today, Chuck Grassley said while that was going on, the Biden administration let a terrorist into the country under the Afghan refugee program. We're very lucky to start the show with our amazing colleague and friend, Jerry Dunleavy. Jerry, good to have you here.
Glad to be here, as always.
Let's start with the juicing of the numbers. Great story. Everybody's been talking about it all day. What was the Biden FBI up to?
Yeah, so after January 6th, and then the President Biden taking office, we saw for years FBI Director Chris Wray, the DOJ, DHS, constantly going to this mantra that domestic terrorism cases had doubled since 2020. This is what they kept saying, and President Biden, the Biden administration, used that to launch new domestic terrorism initiatives, to launch a domestic terrorism national strategy. And I was always curious, what are the actual specifics about this? And for 4 years, the Biden administration refused to actually give details on what was actually driving this alleged rise in domestic terrorism. Well, ODNI declassified a document from the FBI, the National Counterterrorism Center, and DHS from early 2022, which revealed that at that time, 61% of the 3,000 domestic terrorism cases that the FBI had opened, 61% of those were connected to January 6th.
Wow.
And out of the domestic terrorism arrests that the FBI made in 2021, 78% of them were related to January 6th. And so what you essentially had was this riot on one day for a number of hours on January 6th, driving this massive rise, alleged massive rise in domestic terrorism that was then cited for years and years and years by the Biden administration. But now we know that this supposed doubling is all just traced back to that one day.
Stunning. It's just stunning.
Democrats, as my dad would say, made hay while the sun was shining when it comes to January 6th. It seems to me that with January 6th and even COVID to some degree, maybe that was the casus belli, because with January 6th in particular, it was an excuse to strip away civil liberties, to violate people's privacy, to go after Americans, to increase the size of government when it came to the security state. Does it seem like that to you?
Well, look, I mean, now we know that they were using the riot that happened on January 6th to sort of artificially argue that the domestic terrorism threat in the United States had doubled. And they used that alleged increase in domestic terrorism threat to do Attorney General Garland's very notorious school boards memo going after protesting parents. They used it to institute for the first time a national domestic counterterrorism strategy. And underpinning all of that was sort of this artificial, this artificial increase. And this is what President Biden talked about for 4 years. And if he had actually ended up running for president, this is what he was going to be running on. And now we know that this one day, this one riot, was used to justify just a huge slew of things for 4 years. And the big thing is that the American people for 4 years were not told what was actually underpinning this argument that the domestic terrorism threat had doubled. Now, there were some FBI whistleblowers that came forward and told the truth about this, but these declassified documents that we finally have is the first time that we're seeing the FBI in its own words admitting that was going on from the start.
Just amazing stuff. We got about 30 seconds. I want to turn to our first guest, who is one of those FBI whistleblowers. But Chuck Grassley, we actually let a terrorist into this country, didn't we?
Yeah, Grassley has now revealed that the DOJ Inspector General released a report that showed that during the disastrous and chaotic evacuation from Afghanistan, 55 Afghan evacuees, Afghan nationals, actually had hits on the terrorism database watch list, and something like a dozen of them, we didn't even know they had hits on it until they were already in the United States. Juxtaposing these two things, this I think artificial rise in domestic terrorism threat with the way that the Biden administration botched this withdrawal from Afghanistan and actually increased the foreign terrorism threat. I mean, this is a big deal. And of course, with both of these things, we're only finding these things out years later after he left office.
We had years of feeling we were safer than we really should have felt. Really amazing. Great work, Jerry. You always do great work. Every day I can't wait to see what's on the site when I wake up with your byline on it.
Thank you.
All right. If all this sounds a little familiar, and it does to all of us, because on this show over the last couple of years on this network, we've had a former FBI agent and a great whistleblower named Steve Friend. He was warning there were abuses like this in J6. We're lucky to have him join us again today. Steve, good to have you back on.
Thank you very much for having me today.
You saw this going on in real time, the overcounting of cases, trying to break everything down to make the domestic threat look far worse than it is. A little sense of satisfaction now that the American public has the data to back that up?
Yeah, I definitely feel a little bit vindicated here, and I'm grateful to Jerry for covering down on this. I'm grateful to Director Gabbard for pushing this information out there so great journalists like him and yourself can cover it and expand it out knowledge-wise to the American population. I wish it had happened a little bit sooner. I'm sitting here 995 days after being removed as a retaliation for bringing my concerns forward, which I didn't do for any political reasons. Because I wanted the FBI to follow its own procedures and policies, and can clearly see that they were manipulating January 6th in order to boost the terrorism stats so that the bureaucracy itself could actually succeed, because success for a bureaucracy isn't growing, and that isn't getting more manpower and funding and personnel and capabilities. And they use J6 as this boondoggle in order to do that. And then it also highlighted the fact that the FBI has a quota system and that senior executives were profiting because their subordinates were manipulating cases in order to boost these stats. They were pocketing $30,000, $40,000, or $50,000 every single year during the Biden administration.
Those are in the form of bonuses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, senior executives as part of the integrated program management quota system that the FBI has and still does have. And ultimately, as a whistleblower, I was hoping to get that sort of policy highlighted so that it could be eradicated by the new incoming administration here. Part of their compensation is because their underlings, their subordinates, are able to achieve certain statistical accomplishments, being case openings, intelligence products, tools used, arrests actually made. And you're getting up there into $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for these special agents in charge or assistant directors in charge of the 55 field offices around the country that the American people are on the hook for paying every single year, and that gets carried forward into their retirement because it contributes to their pension.
Yeah. Steve, you have such a great perspective from inside the FBI, but you also now have a really great perspective outside. You have a wildly popular podcast. A lot of people come to you for information, especially when it comes to intelligence agencies. When you look at the damage that this does to the FBI, and you look at the status of it now obviously under a Republican president and under Director Kash Patel, can that faith be restored?
It can. It's going to take quite a lift, though, and it's going to have to change a paradigm shift in the way that they approach national security. Because during the Biden administration, we got to the bottom of the slippery slope. The Niemöller poem, where first they came for the trade unionists, and then the socialists, and then the Jew, and I said nothing. And then when they came for me, there was no one left to speak for me. We got to the bottom of that because the FBI devolved its national security mission against protecting the American people against fraud and force, and accepting that in a free society, allegedly free, there is inherent risk. They shaped that mission set so that they could expand their bureaucracy, and they evolved it from going after legitimate threat actors out there to moms at school board meetings and people flying a Betsy Ross flag. And then they determined that they were anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremists, agaves, people who had a perception of government overreach, fit the bill for a domestic terrorist label so that the FBI could go after them because they presented the actual threat to the bureaucracy succeeding, to the bureaucracy expanding and getting more funding because those people had a preference for small government. And that is continuing now. The agave is still a label that's out there. And we have another one that's been highlighted recently under the Kash Patel FBI, and that's the nihilistic violent extremist, which really means someone who doesn't have any sort of ideology, but the FBI will be able to entrap them so they can continue to expand. This sort of thing has to be stomped down by Director Patel, by Deputy Director Bongino. They're the outsiders that are there to do that. They're the ones that bring forward the mandate the American people set there on November of last year, and I'm hoping that they will actually embrace that here in the early days.
Yeah, really important. I want to ask Steve a little bit about what happens after they juice the numbers. So they juice the numbers to make this case in Washington that there's an emerging domestic terrorism threat. It's serious. And then they change the roles that every FBI agent can use to open up an investigation from predicate, a reasonable factual basis that a crime has occurred or is about to occur, to concerning non-criminal behavior. Basically, anything the FBI wants to look at in the name of domestic terrorism, they can now look at. The numbers were the predicate for making that change, correct?
They certainly put it on steroids. That capability has always been there since the Patriot Act. Right. Ability to open up what's called an assessment, which for the layperson is an FBI investigation. The FBI has had the ability to do that for any articulable purpose since the passage of the Patriot Act. You don't need a reasonable suspicion or probable cause or any sort of allegation of a crime. But when the January 6th incident happens, now they've turbocharged it. Now they've empowered all the people on the ground in order to do that. But in effect, they ran it out of Washington, D.C. the entire time. And that was really the manipulation. You had a task force in Washington, D.C. that was duty-bound and responsible for actually investigating these cases. But they had them be opened up officially around the country to create this giant map of the United States of America that the president, the attorney general, and the director of the FBI could get out there and pump their fists and say, look at all these terrorism numbers. But in effect, all of those cases were derivative from January 6th, and most of them weren't actually terrorism investigations. Most of them were criminal charges, misdemeanor parading inside the Capitol grounds.
Steve, before we let you go, I want to ask you about that predicate that to me sounds just like future crime or thought crime, like that became the new predicate for investigating. I have no doubt that there are still people within the agency who still subscribe to and agree to that and maybe even be maneuvering in that way as investigators at the FBI. If that happens, how far would that investigation go now that you have Kash Patel at the top, you have Dan Bongino as the number 2, and hopefully there are some stopgap measures in between?
Look, the FBI has a caveat that says they do not investigate individuals for their First Amendment protected activity, but they absolutely violate it with just about every single one of their national security investigations. People there deem themselves to be the arbiter of right think and wrong think. And anyone who engaged in this, particularly with January 6th, because it was so broad in scope, needs to be brought forward and asked directly, what was your involvement with these investigations? Were you just following orders? Because that's unacceptable. Were you leading the edge here? Then that's completely unacceptable, and you should probably be brought up on charges of a criminal conspiracy to violate rights. If anybody was sort of on the perimeter, was just doing a background check or something to that effect, that's appropriate. And the list exists. The DOJ asked for it in the very early days of the Biden administration. Brian Driscoll, as the acting director, failed to turn it over. That list exists and should be brought forward over to DOJ, over to Attorney General Bondi, and to Ed Martin to look at as the head of weaponization.
So very important. One last question. There's allegedly a secret room of documents or a secret stash of documents that were recently found. What do your sources, I mean, you got a lot of friends still left in the FBI that respect what you did. Do you know anything about why those documents were segregated and kept out of normal productions?
Well, I think those documents were kept segregated for obvious reasons to protect the integrity or lack thereof of James Comey and his ilk. But my concern here is that there are lots of secret rooms inside the Hoover building, and the people that are still there who just kept their heads down and just followed orders during James Comey, during Christopher Wray, now they're getting in the ear of the Dan Bonginos and the Kash Patels, and they're showing them what they want to show them. So there needs to be a full vetting. We need to fumigate the entire thing, and hopefully this will galvanize. This latest revelation here about how bad January 6th was handled will galvanize an effort to open up everything and bring some people back into the fold who are actually trustworthy, have proven themselves weighed, measured, and they're found actually to possess the integrity to have the positions that they once held.
You took the ultimate risk in blowing the whistle on what you saw go wrong, and because of that, we know so much more today because you got Congress on the case. Yeah. And without your courage and without your data, Steve, I don't think we would know half of what we've learned today. It's a great honor to have you back on the show.
Thanks very much for having me, and thanks again to Empower Oversight for representing me throughout this last 2.5 years.
Group. Absolutely. Well, good to have you, sir. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, there's a bold new bill to rein in reckless emergency spending in Washington. Imagine that, reckless emergency spending in Washington. Could this be an accountability push lawmakers need? We'll have the congressman who started it, Congressman Martin Stutzman, on next. Hey folks, let's be honest, our body lets us know, right? We're not getting any younger. And if you want to look and feel your best, you need to check out our good friends at Pure Health Research. They have 45 premium health supplements designed to help with every health goal, whether it's boosting your energy, trimming belly fat, supporting healthy blood sugar, pumping your testosterone up, or even reducing swelling in your legs. Pure Health Research Supplement Store has you covered. Each formula is crafted with natural, non-GMO ingredients backed by clinical research and manufactured right here in the good old USA. And here's the best part. Pure Health Research is offering you an exclusive 35% discount. You heard me right, 35% off. Just go to purehealthresearch.com and use the coupon code JUSTNEWS at checkout. With their 365-day money-back guarantee, there's zero risk in trying something new, so why wait? Head over to purehealthresearch.com right now. Explore their 45 amazing supplements and save 35% before this deal ends with the coupon code JUSTNEWS. Don't miss this chance to feel your best.
Welcome back, everybody. President Trump's OBBB, the one big, beautiful bill, well, it's still hanging out around the Senate, and it seems that the rhetoric around it has cooled off a little bit, especially in recent days with Elon Musk and President Trump kind of cooling it with their own rhetoric. And we now have renewed calls to pass it from people like Tom Homan in the Trump administration who say that it will really help out with immigration enforcement. So are we going to see this thing actually land on President Trump's desk, and do we need more spending cuts to go along with it? Joining us now to talk about all of that is Indiana Congressman Marlin Stutzman. Congressman, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Amanda. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, sir. I actually want to start with something that you introduced with regards to emergency spending. Now, emergency spending, I know, the American people have this perception of it because it's for public health emergencies like COVID, for natural disasters, national security issues, but you have put forth some very formidable parameters to stop the runaway spending when something like this happens. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so you know what, you would think that all of us as common sense Americans, that Washington, D.C. would have like a rainy day fund for emergency spending, but there isn't. They just simply added to the debt. And, remember when Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste? Well, that's what has happened in Washington over the past several decades, that whenever there is a crisis, there's this big spending package, and it's never put inside like our budget numbers, and so it's always added to our additional spending, and so that adds to our debt. Of the $27 trillion that we have in public debt, 12 of that is because of emergency spending. So going all the way back to Hurricane Katrina, Sandy, those are all situations where I think the American people understand, but they also believe that this is going to be something that is responsibly taken care of. And so what my Emergency Spending Accountability Act does is that it requires us in Congress to pay that spending back within 5 years, 20% of it over 5 years going forward. Because again, Washington has just shown it's irresponsible when it comes to emergency spending. Good reasons at times, but always overreaction and always adding to our debt, and that needs to stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I think everyone in Common Sense America would agree with. So one of the things we learned about COVID, which was the most recent emergency spending fire hose, is that foreign actors knew the vulnerabilities in our system, and they set up these con artists who would take our loans and our worker aid and other things. Are you seeing any evidence by the federal agencies to have learned from that fiasco and to rein in future fraud like this, or do you still think that this is a big vulnerability for us?
I do think it is a vulnerability for us. I do believe that the Trump administration is taking it very seriously as well. But I know for us in rural America, food security is national security, and I believe that that's one area where we are vulnerable. You know, and again, I can't say for sure what's happening, but I get reports from constituents that see drones flying over animal production facilities. You know, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's something that needs to be looked into. If there's one thing that we learned through COVID is that the Chinese will go at our vulnerable points and use our health against us, and they're not above, you know, biological warfare. They will do and say anything to not only, you know, terrorize and put fear into Americans, but they'll actually do it. And so I think that's why, you know, these open borders that we've had over the past 5 years under the Biden administration have been a huge gaping hole and allowing for, we don't know who is coming in. I mean, we're starting to see this in LA with the riots there, but I think there's even more nefarious actors that are out there that are ready to cause havoc, not only in our food supply, but also just in our daily lives across America.
Congressman, you represent a state that has beautiful, beautiful countryside, amazing rural areas. The messaging with regards to the one big, beautiful bill from Democrats is that it stomps on rural America, which I don't know the last time Democrats cared about rural America. But that seems to me that it's not the case, because especially with respect to farmland and hospitals, it actually enhances those areas.
It really does. And, you know, I love Indiana. It's so diverse from top to bottom, from the Ohio River up to the Lake Michigan, where I live in Northeast Indiana with all of our lakes. And it is beautiful farmland. And, you know, and I hear from constituents on a daily basis that they're ready for the government to pick its foot up off their neck. You know, even James Carville knows that Democrats have abandoned the rural parts of this country to their own detriment. And I think that, you know, what OB3 does is it keeps the tax rates in place. Most farmers and small businesses are partnerships, sub-S's, or they're not generally C Corps. So keeping those tax rates where they're currently at is a huge, gives us certainty. So that way we can plan for the future and that we're not going to see a tax increase. It also raises that cap for the inheritance tax, which that's a big deal. This is going to help about 20-some million farmers across the country, making sure that they're not going to be susceptible to the inheritance tax and lose their farm or their farming operation. And then also, finally, it removes the ridiculous mandate from the Biden administration on our rural health care nursing requirements. You know, that's one thing about Democrats in Washington is they think one size fits all, and it just doesn't. And that's why it's important to allow flexibility in our rural areas, and, you know, state by state has different needs. And so that's what OB3 is doing. And I tell you, this is a great bill for middle-class America. It's, you know, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, which that's another big deal for manufacturing and agriculture in my district.
So I want to talk or stay on agriculture for a second, because we've had 3 episodes in the last 2 weeks where Chinese scientists have been arrested or charged with trying to smuggle in dangerous pathogens, many which would target, if they ever were released, harm our crop, our food system, our food security. We fund a lot of these scientists. In fact, the first 2 scientists, we definitely were funding their program. Are members of Congress beginning to get an understanding what is going on, and is it time to stop funding Chinese scientists doing this type of research?
Yeah, there really is. You know, there's an old joke that says, you know, what's the difference between Wuhan, China, and Las Vegas, Nevada? Well, what stays in Las Vegas, or what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. It's not the same in Wuhan. And we know that that's one of their way that they can, you know, create problems for us. As I, you know, mentioned earlier, that our food security is such an important piece. My family is actually in the poultry business, and you know, that is a concern. You know, we already have concerns about natural diseases like bird flu and others. But the fact that we have nefarious actors, coming in across an open border over the last 4 years that could, put diseases into our food supply is a really serious matter. And I do think that members of Congress are taking it much more seriously. And RFK is also bringing awareness and attention to the matter as well. And this is part of today's warfare. Unfortunately, it's not only going to be planes and tanks. This is a way that they can disrupt an economy greatly, and especially when they go after food supply and what it could do to our healthcare system.
I hate to admit it, the reality is that the CCP is very industrious and inventive when it comes to finding ways to deplete the fabric of this country. Sir, speaking of depleting the fabric of this country, especially in places like Los Angeles, President Trump sending in the National Guard. Bob Bonta is suing. Gavin Newsom says he's going to sue for bringing in these troops. But it seems to me, and I feel like this is for a lot of Americans, if the National Guard had not moved in and those Marines yesterday, the entire city could be on fire.
Oh, it could. And again, Democrats are willing to let this happen. Governor Newsom is being irresponsible, and I think what President Trump has suggested is right. I mean, think about this. I mean, who's going to pay for the destruction that this government, the mayor in Los Angeles, the governor of California, is allowing to take place in California? Who's going to pay for this? Are they going to just let it happen to make some political point, which I think that they're just dead wrong on the issue as well. But the fact is the taxpayer is going to have to pay for it. I think that there will be Californians, hopefully, who are starting to realize that President Trump is looking out for them, wanting to keep them safe, wanting to make sure that we don't have to rebuild our great cities. We already have problems in our cities that need a lot of work. And the fact that we're going to let these rioters come in and burn our cities and destroy cities and ruin lives should not be acceptable. And I applaud President Trump for sending in not only the National Guard, but send in the Marines as well. Let's squash this now and not let major destruction take place.
Yeah. So the last time you were with us, you told us a fascinating story of your trip to Syria. It was one of the most popular stories on our site for the entire month. Since that time, the interim government continues to signal it wants to be a stabilizing force. This is an extraordinary moment in Middle East history, isn't it?
It absolutely is, John. I mean, it's exciting, nerving at times. I was talking to the ambassador to Turkey and to Syria, Tom Barrack, just recently, and he said, keep praying. Good things are happening. I was in Israel just a couple weeks ago, and was talking to the government there. They're actually having backdoor conversations with Syria. We're not out of the woods by far. There's still some bad actors that are roaming around Syria trying to create havoc. But so far, I mean, it looks like there's an opportunity here for peace across the Middle East. I mean, we still have to stay vigilant. Iran, of course, wants to disrupt. I think we need to question even Qatar's, some of their intentions with some of the funding that goes on. But there's definitely good signs that are taking place, and people seem to wanting to move towards prosperity. And I think that's where it comes back to President Trump's doctrine of peace through strength and prosperity. That's really a game changer, and we'll keep praying for him.
Sir, we'll finish on the lighter side, and forgive me if I sound ignorant on this topic. It's because I don't watch the NBA at all, so I'm going to read directly from the prompter. Apparently, the Pacers are in the NBA Finals against OKC Thunder. How are you feeling about the series?
Hey, so we won one in Oklahoma. That was a huge win at the end. The Pacers have surprised a lot of us.
Hey, sir,
I
hate to interrupt you. President Trump has just taken the mic at his landing spot. We're just going to break to that. Thank you for being with us today. Well, I want to get your Pacers reaction. We'll get you back on. Here we go, President Trump.
Not with the governor, but I've always had a good relationship with him. He just doesn't do a very good job. He should have never been allowed to start. And if we didn't get involved, Los Angeles would be burning down right now, just like the house is burning down.
Are you concerned about anything that could go wrong by having the military there? They're trained for
No, it can only go right. By having the military, it de-escalates. I mean, that was the only way. These people are agitators, they're troublemakers. I believe many of them are paid. I watched them breaking up the sidewalk with a big hammer, handing pieces of the concrete to other people.
Who do you think is paying for that?
Nobody's paying for it. Thank you.
Absolutely might have something to do with it.
Thank you for saying that. Somebody's paying for that. I watched total professionals. He's banging the curb, banging the granite, banging the concrete. And he had a whole group of people. They lined up like totally professional, grabbed the big chunks, and they dropped it on the soldiers. They dropped it on the Los Angeles police. These are insurrectionists. They're agitators or troublemakers. At a minimum, they're troublemakers.
Mr. President, Governor Newsom says he did not speak to you a day ago, as he said in the Oval Office earlier. What's your response to
Well,
that?
I gave him, wasn't a day ago, it was a little longer than that, and I presented the phone conversation to Fox News, John Roberts and Molly Line at Fox News, because they were the ones that said it. And we actually spent 16-point-something minutes on the phone, and I told him he's got to get his act together because you're going to have some bad times in Los Angeles if he doesn't. We had a pleasant conversation. The proof was from the phone company. It was from the phone company. So I spoke to him at a certain time. I'm sure you all saw it. You saw it. Yeah. But why would you ask me that question if you saw it? You know, I mean, he asked me a question, and then he says, yeah, I saw that you spoke to him. Yeah, I spoke to him for over 16 minutes. I spoke to him for over 16 minutes, and I told him to get his act together, but he hasn't been able to do that. I mean, the man really, we could have a great, we have an Olympics coming up. We have to put the right foot forward. We have to do a job. We have a lot of people all over the world watching Los Angeles. We've got the Olympics, so we have this guy allowing this to happen. Let me tell you, when you watch these agitators break up concrete and hand it out to people as they stood on line to get it, these have to be paid troublemakers.
Mr. President, you appear to say that the governor and the mayor paid them. Do you believe that the governor and the mayor paid the agitators?
No, I don't say the governor and the mayor. I said somebody's paying them, I think. And if they're not, they're just troublemakers. What can I tell you? But I believe somebody's paying them. I've never seen somebody with a big hammer so professional. Now, they took the bricks away from them. So they say, how do we get in? The military did. How do we get in? And what do we do? They said, I have an idea. Let's break up the concrete. And that's even better than bricks. And that's what happened.
Yeah. You just witnessed an amazing spectacle of flexing on military. What impressed you the most?
I think the total love for the military. I mean, I was with the generals. They're explaining the different maneuvers. And the love they have for the Army and the military is beautiful. They're really great people. And I've never seen anything quite like that. I don't think any other president has either. You know, they really put on a good show. I asked them, did you do that for Biden? They said no. They didn't do it for Biden. I wonder why.
There could be some pretty big protests this weekend.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I know this. As long as we have the military there, the protests won't mean anything. Last night, if we weren't there, they would have burned down the city. But they did not a lot of damage other than they broke up a lot of concrete looking for weapons. You know, those are weapons. If that hits somebody in the head, the president has either. You know, they really put on a good show. I asked them, did you do that for Biden? They said no. They didn't do it for Biden. I wonder why.
There could be some pretty big protests this weekend.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I know this. As long as we have the military there, the protests won't mean anything. Last night, if we weren't there, they would have burned down the city. But they did not a lot of damage other than they broke up a lot of concrete looking for weapons. You know, those are weapons. If that hits somebody in the head, the person's dead. You know that, right?
What do you mean by a very heavy force will be met with the protest?
Oh, the military will be very heavy force. I'm very proud to tell you that. They might as well turn around. They're wasting their time. Some of them will end up in jail for a long period of time. They use weapons. That concrete is a weapon, a dangerous weapon. Worse than a brick, heavier than a brick. And they were dropping it off bridges and throwing it at soldiers and police. They're not doing that. You know, I went in my first term, I waited for governors to call in the military, and they didn't want to do it. And I watched Minneapolis and other places burn for a long time. And I said, when are you going to call? When are you going to call? And I said, if I ever do this again, if they're not responsive at the beginning, not at the end. You know, I called in the military in Minneapolis, but it was 7 days. I waited for this guy, the same guy that ran for vice president, who's a very dumb person. He's a low IQ individual, like many Democrats are. But I waited for him to call him in. I kept waiting. I called him every day and say, when are you calling him? And finally I called him because I'm not going to wait. They were destroying the city. The whole city was burning down. Horrible. Okay.
A judge has set a hearing for Thursday from Governor Newsom's lawsuit. Do you think your administration will be successful Thursday for the hearing?
Well, even Senator Fetterman said very strongly that this is horrible what they're doing and that the Democrats are making a big mistake by not talking about it. And I agree with that. I think this is in a league with, and maybe even worse in a true sense, what they're doing is now worse than men playing in women's sports. I think that's a ridiculous thing. Open borders, you take a look at open borders. Open borders is what caused it. Many of these people, many of them, not all of them I guess, but many of them came through the Joe Biden stupid open borders. Really sad to watch. It's very sad to watch this being our country. Now, with our National Guard and our, fairly low number of Marines, they had no chance. And if you look, they were a little bit tougher than the police. Did you notice that? The police are trained not to do it. They're really trained. They're under tremendous political constraint. They're great police. I know the police in L.A. I know the force. They're very good, but they're not allowed to do their thing. They're just not allowed. They're restricted by radical left politicians who are pretty shameful.
As Commander-in-Chief, sir, what rules of engagement do you want for the military? What limitations?
A very simple rule of engagement. If they're dangerous, if they're throwing concrete or bricks, if they're spitting in the face of the police or whoever's in front of them, if they're punching people, if they're doing all of the things that you see done for the last 3 nights, that I would say is engagement. We need to keep our city straight. I want to save Los Angeles. And Newsom is totally incompetent. He's not going to do it. Look at the fires he had. He had fires where half the city, it seemed, burned down. What was it, 25,000 houses, all because he wouldn't take water. I released the water from the Pacific Northwest, and it came down millions of gallons a day. And it's right there right now. They'd like to send it back. There's something wrong with these people. All I want in terms of engagement, I just want to see peace. If there's peace, we get out. If there's even a chance of no peace, we stay there until there's peace. And a lot of people are being arrested. The rioters, or whatever you want to call them, they better know a lot of people are being arrested. They're going to be in jail for a long time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
All right, President Trump arriving back from the visit to Fort Bragg and that extraordinary display of military might, celebrating soon the 250th birthday of our Army. We're going to take a quick commercial break. More right after these messages. Welcome back, America. As most of the country's attention is on the protests and riots in Los Angeles, as they rightly should be with everything that's going on, we thought it'd be a good time to go down and check south of the border, where our amazing border correspondent, Oscar Ramirez, says migrants are preparing for another wave in 2028 after President Trump leaves office. And the NGOs, nonprofits that are helping them, guess what? We still fund them in the federal government. It's just remarkable. Oscar's going to here to tell it directly. He's in Tapachula, Mexico. Oscar, good to have you on.
John, thank you for having me. Yes, we just visited over here the south of the border to find out if these international organizations are active. The UNHCR, OIM, and also the United Nations are still active right here in the south of the border of Tapachula, receiving also migrants. As the statistics and what other journalists have told us over here, more than 10,000 migrants there are waiting right here in the city of Tapachula, assimilated. They already got jobs and everything, but they're still waiting to see if the border is going to be reopening in the year 2028 or in the near future. Also, we crossed to Guatemala, and just steps away from the border of Guatemala, there's the OIM office. Also, they shut the door to us as soon as we went over there and try to question them. Where are they getting their funding and why they're still open? We did this trip, John, because not too long ago, Kristi Noem went on a meeting with Donald Trump and told him that the president of Mexico told her that the president of Mexico returned more than 500,000 migrants into their destinies, which that is a complete lie. The border is still wide open between Guatemala and Mexico, and migrants are still coming in, waiting and assimilating over here in Mexico to see if there's going to be a possibility to open in the United States of America.
So they're chilling in Tapachula for 3 years on the off chance that J.D. Vance doesn't become the nominee and win, and that a Democrat does?
Yes, and not only that, on the first day that Donald Trump became president, just a minute after CBP One app was canceled, and we interviewed the former director of Attention of Migrants in Tijuana. He told us that more than 1 million petitions of CBP One apps have been canceled. So you're talking about that more 1 million people are waiting in the north borders that connect to the United States of America, plus the hundreds of thousands that are stranded in the middle parts and the south parts. And, not too long ago, we visited a shelter in Tijuana that was holding more than 800 migrants. All of these people, they're still awaiting and thinking that there's going to be a possibility that CBP One app can be reactivated, and that can, there be a possibility that it can open up the floodgates again if the Democratic politician wins the election.
Oscar, you mentioned the UN. They have an Office of Migration. I believe the State Department for years has funded them. Describe the role that the UN Migration Office or Office of Migration plays in this continuum of people coming up, navigating their way to Mexico to stage to possibly come across our border.
Well, you see the problem that you have right now, it is all connected. The LA riots, all the riots that you're going to see, sadly, and exacerbated and growing inside of the country of the United States of America, it is because of the difficulty that I said this before for the Trump administration to deport and to basically detect these individuals. A lot of the military age males, they came through the Biden administration, and a lot of them former military. So it is going to be extremely difficult. And the United Nations, it is just the head of the snake. It is the Global Compact of Immigration that it was brought by Barack Obama, then reactivated by Joe Biden. And it is the number one, facilitator for massive child trafficking and massive exploitation of people into the United States of America. So it is the number one prosecutor, and it is the number one that is getting funded by the American taxpayer. So it is extremely important, their role in all of this that is happening.
Unbelievable. I want to ask you about public sentiment, because there was a CNN poll that showed an insane switch, 40-point swing towards the GOP. The GOP is now, I believe, up +8 when it comes to immigration. If you watch mainstream media, they will tell you, especially these riots happening in Los Angeles, they would make it seem like the entire country is in uproar over these ICE raids. But that, in fact, is not the case. Does it seem to you, did you already perceive that 40-point shift? I'll be honest, I didn't see it happening that much, maybe to some degree.
If it comes to the Latino population, yes, a lot of them, they have drifted into, believing that legal migration is the right pathway into the United States of America. I think, Amanda, I think the number one thing that Republicans need to do, the message is clear. They don't like illegal migration, and the message for a lot of Americans, the majority, they don't want illegal migration, but also the Republicans have the golden opportunity to teach the world how to do legal migration. And I think that is the number one thing that they need to start working right now. This is if they do that message, it will be clear, and it will be more plastered to Central America and South America, and we will not have this gigantic problem as it is, all the illegal, progressive, mercenary, activist liberals that they actually infiltrated and destroying cities right now inside of the United States.
Oscar, real quickly, do you have any sense about who might, the president just said in his brief stop after he got back from the trip from Fort Bragg that there is, he believes that some of these protesters are being funded. Do you have any sense of what sort of groups or ideologies are funding these riots and protests in America? Do you hear anything on the street when you're down in Mexico?
It's a copy paste of what happened with Black Lives Matter. We see Antifa. The majority of these people, they're not Mexicans. We don't represent this. We do not burn the American flag. There's actually a law in Mexico that prohibits you from tampering with the Mexican flag. And you tamper with the Mexican flag, Article 54 bis of the Constitution of Mexico says if you tamper, you will be taken to federal prison, and that is the Article 288. So Mexicans, we respect our flag and we respect other flags. Every single individual that is doing this, horrible crimes inside right now in the United States of America, they infiltrated mercenary activists that everybody knows, George Soros and all these NGOs and left-wing, millionaires that they're just basically funding this illegal acts and this arson that is happening right now inside of the United States. So it is being destabilized on purpose. It is a copy-paste of what happened with Black Lives Matter. And sadly, if it doesn't get stopped immediately, it will exacerbate and it will grow. And we don't want that to happen to the United States.
Oscar, this network is so lucky to have you on one side of the border and Ben Bergquam in LA. We wouldn't know half the things that occurred over the last 5 years if it wasn't for your courage and your great reporting. And that have been, what a great honor to have you back on the show today. Thanks for a great update.
Thank you so much, John and Amanda. Like always, it's an honor to be with you.
Yeah, we enjoyed every time you come on. We always learn something. We're smarter when you're on. All right. Next up, the big beautiful bill is still kicking around in the Senate, and opinion among Republican senators is divided on it. Will it help more than it hurts? We'll break it down after these quick messages. Hey, folks, if you've been following the facts, not the spin, you know we're living through a pivotal moment in American history. In just the first 5 months of President Trump's return, we've seen measurable progress. Border security is tightening, deportations are up, woke and DEI policies are being dismantled, and our military is being restored to strength as a fighting machine. These are real actions, not talking points, but here's what the facts can also tell us. One man can't fix everything. Congress needs to get in line with the American people, and that's where you come in. Join AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens, at amac.us/justnews for as little as $12 a year. You'll get their award-winning magazine, valuable discounts, and access to free resources. But more importantly, you'll be part of a movement committed to protecting the values that made this country great: faith, family, and of course, freedom. Don't just read the headlines, help shape them. Join me and become an AMAC member today by going to amac.us/justnews and stand with millions of informed Americans right now.
Welcome back, everybody, to Just the News, No Noise. The country faces an existential crisis, and it isn't what's going on with the riots in Los Angeles, at least not yet. It has to do with our national debt, because even though Elon Musk and President Trump have buried the hatchet for now, Elon was right about one thing: we have to cut spending at some point. So joining us now to talk about how the government can do that is businessman from Texas and someone who is trying desperately to raise national awareness to combat our country's debt crisis. Joe Penland is here with us. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Sir, as you looked at the details of OB3, is that what Congressman Stutzman called it? OB3, the way that it was, the status of it when it passed out of the House and got sent to the Senate, were you happy with that, or what changes would you want to see out of the Senate?
Well, I hope they don't make too many changes. Obviously, when you get this passed, there's no two ways about it. We're up against it. We're going to have to increase our debt ceiling. There's no two ways about that. But there's some good provisions in this. There's no perfect bill, and everybody needs to really pay attention to that. Look at it as a whole. It's good for America. We need to get it behind us and move on, because we've got a lot of other problems to address.
Sir, I want to talk a little bit about the process. I think one of the false narratives is that if all the spending cutting that solves the deficit for future isn't done in this one big, beautiful bill, it'll never get done. But in fact, there's already a rescission bill that's going to take a few more $1 billion out, and maybe 7 or more are coming down the pike through the summer and fall. The process doesn't end in cutting spending with the big, beautiful bill. It starts really there, right? And that it should accelerate. Is that the real expectation?
That's right. This is not the end all. Obviously, it's a good step. It is a real good step, but there's going to be several more to add to it as we go on. These tax breaks, to get people back to work, to not taxing tips and so forth. There's so many people suffering in this country that really need a break. And we need to do that. I think we need to extend the tax cuts of 2017, make them permanent. Look at where work was when he was there the first time. You see, everybody that wanted to work was working. We're going to do that again. I attended a energy summit in D.C. last week. From people from all over the world are wanting to come to America and spend their money. And that's the only way we're going to get out of debt, is we're going to have a massive influx of money from outside the country to create lots of jobs here, good paying jobs.
Joe, regardless of the content of the bill, whether you like it or not, this feels like a do or die situation for Republicans, especially Republicans in the House, to keep their majority. Does it feel like that to you as far as public sentiment and whether they can or cannot get it done?
Well, it's razor thin. There's no two ways about it. But I believe they're going to get it done. I had supper the other night. I call it supper. Y'all call it dinner with the speaker the other night. They're optimistic. There's a whole lot of people optimistic that it's going to get done. I just hope the Senate doesn't hold it back too long. I hope we get this done for July 4th, and I think we will. And I think America will be a whole lot better off. We'll be on the right path, but there's still a lot of turns, a lot of bumps in the road. So this is not going to solve everything, but But I'll tell you what, we need to get it done sooner than later.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Sir, one of the surprises in some of the data we've been seeing is the future projections of what President Trump's tariff policy will do to generate new revenue for the government, help us close that spending gap. It's in the hundreds of billions of dollars over the next few years. I think a lot of people weren't sure what the tariffs would ultimately do, what the Department of Government External Revenue was going to do. But now there are some hopeful signs that tariffs are going to be part of this revenue equation going forward. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm confident it is. I mean, we had to level the playing field. We've been behind a long time in this. There's nothing wrong with getting people sending stuff to our country and vice versa. That's okay. But we've had it, we've been taking it on the chin for a long time. But in that summit for 2 days, there was people, like I say, from all over the world wanting to come to this country and build plants and build factories. And the reason for that is because of the tariffs. So if they come here and create the jobs, the tax base here, we'll dig ourselves out of this hole a whole lot quicker than being what we have been in the past 4 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Joe, if we go to that website behind you, Joe for Texas, what will we find?
Well, you'll find a whole lot of things that we're doing, but go to that because we're working on Social Security. We know that's a huge problem. We think we have some answers to that. We're going to visit hopefully with the president in the next couple of months about that. We've been visiting with the speaker on that. We got to reform our immigration policy. There's no two ways about it. If we had a good immigration policy like we had back when we were bringing people through Ellis Island, we wouldn't be having the riots that we got right now. We just need to get our head out of the sand and do what's right because those are humans. The biggest thing those people have done wrong, they were born on one side of the Rio Grande, I was born on the other.
That's right, Joe. Always a pleasure having you here, sir. Thank you so much for being here. We just had a group from Washington, D.C., some students come through the office today. I think they should also go to Ellis Island, and that would fix the immigration problem very quickly. That's right. All right, everybody, that does it for us tonight. We'll see you tomorrow.